Good evening. This is going to be not much of almost like a discussion, if you will. This is a video dedicated to Gene Laratonda, who in an email said to do a summary of a video regarding James Kreindler, who's a lawyer, the Kreindler and Kreindler law firm that's representing the 9/11 victims' families, where he did a lecture back in January 2nd of 2020 regarding Saudi financing in the 9/11 attacks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. And this is going to be the video that we're going to be discussing. And what I'll do is the lecture is over an hour and 30 minutes long, but I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to do the first 40 minutes because he does a question and answer period, but I'm going to skip that. And I'll add some commentary about my thoughts regarding what Mr. Kreindler is saying in this video. So why don't we just get on with it? By the way, you said you would give me $20 if I did it. I don't want your money, Gene. I like doing these things.
You know, it's always a great pleasure for me to be back at Dartmouth, and I'm here with my wife, which makes it even more fun. But to talk to you in this room dedicated to my dad about our life's work, Pan Am 103 and 9/11, is especially gratifying. Walking over here, we passed Silsby when I was here, and I was class of 77. That was, and I think still is, the government building. And like many government majors, I, at the time, had an abiding faith and belief in the integrity and efficacy.
Actually, what I think about was doing is that I may end up contacting James Kreindler for an interview on my podcast, The Darkened Hour, and see if he accepts.
Of our government. Talking to you now, I'll make a prediction. By the time we're done, you will be revolted and horrified to learn what prominent members of our government, including past presidents, have done. You will be equally amazed and thrilled with the courage and determination of a few private citizens and former FBI agents who have beaten the government and defeated the largest lobby effort in the world's history. To begin with 9/11, you know, as Dan said, when all of you came in the room, if asked, well, what did Saudi Arabia have to do with 9/11? The first thing you'd say is 15.
By the way, just to add a little bit, because most people aren't aware of the Arab lobby, which is the Saudi lobby, made up of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. It's the richest, one of the richest lobbies in the world. All right, they spend tens of millions of dollars in Congress. In fact, they have more money than Israel. Israel lobby doesn't spend much money on congressmen. And the reason why Saudi lobby gives a lot more money is because we actually share nothing in common on the superficial level when it comes to culture, theology. We're polar opposites. The only tie that binds is that oil regulation, the oil market. That's about it.
Of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. Some of you who pay particular attention to this might also make the comment that Dan made, and Saudi Arabia has been known to give money to charities who in turn funded Al-Qaeda. But the fact is, 9/11 was an attack on the United States with the active intent and cooperation from 11 known Saudi government officials. Saudi Arabian government officials were the accomplices without whom there never could have been a 9/11 attack.
By the way, this was in 2020. So as of recent, and I've probably the only one who's done a video on it, surprisingly, because it was huge news, but it reaffirmed what some of us already thought, was that now, for the first time, declassified files under the Biden administration, an extra additional 500 pages were released, in which I read the first 300 and did a video about one Saudi official who was on the payroll of a government institution, the consulate of Saudi Airlines, was paying Omar al-Bayoumi, and Omar al-Bayoumi was a money front man for Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who ended up hijacking American Airlines Flight 77. Omar al-Bayoumi gave them an apartment, helped them get apartment, helped them get a driver's license, let them use a cell phone, helped them pay for utilities for the first 2 or 3 months. So yeah, so Omar al-Bayoumi was getting paid by the Saudi government, and he was a ghost employee for one company called DAFCO, Ala DAFCO, in which he basically was not working for this company, but he was getting a check from it.
And I'm going to give you a little information about that. The starting place, I guess, is why would Saudi Arabia support al-Qaeda? Osama bin Laden is Sunni, et cetera. And to understand that, we have to go back to 1979. Most of you with the same hair color as me will remember that year. I was in my 3rd year of law school. The current students obviously will not. But 1979 was a wake-up call to the world, and the Islamic world in particular. 2 cataclysmic events happened. The Shah of Iran was overthrown, something that seemed unthinkable at the time, by radical Shiite Muslims. And in the same year, the mosque in Mecca was taken over by Wahhabi radicals. Now, the House of Saud was built in partnership with the founder of Wahhabism. But until
the founder of Wahhabism is Muhammad ibn Abdul al-Wahhab, who is considered the modern day founder of modern day Salafism or modern day Wahhabism, which led to the group's rise of like Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, Jaish-e-Mohammed in India, Pakistan, Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia. All these radical Salafist groups had origins from the Wahhabi movement.
And you must remember,
which, by the way, is antithetical to Islam in general,
that the king of Saudi Arabia, now King Salman, in Arabic, his title is the keeper and protector of the holy mosques. The word king doesn't appear in his Arabic title.
That's right.
When that happened, the royal family had an oh my God moment. If the Shah can be overthrown and Wahhabi radicals can take over the mosque, we are next unless we take dramatic action.
What happened was in 1979, an individual by the name of Juliman al-Khattabi thought he was the next Mahdi. Okay, so and there was I think it was on Sunday when they did it, the Grand Mosque seizure of 1979, and what they did was it was about 100 or 200 radicals that took over the courtyard, and I want to say it was him and his brother, Khattabi. And I'm sorry, it actually happened in the fall because I thought it was the summer. It happened in November. And they took over the House of Saud and the Masjid al-Haram, which is considered the most holiest site in all of Islam, Mecca and Medina. And Juliman al-Khattabi claimed himself as Mahdi, which is the redeemer of Islam, and had come in the form of a human form, which is himself. Muhammad Abdullah al-Qahtani, and that the Muslims in general, the religious Muslims, must obey him. Now, they did this because they considered the kingdom to becoming too westernized. And what happened was Bin Laden and the Bin Laden family, especially Osama bin Laden, was quite enamored by this, to go against the Western-backed Saudi kingdom, in which these radical Islamists wanted to implement much more stricter governed laws in the kingdom. Now, there's two different paradigms here in Saudi Arabia. So it was constructed as one, led by its military, and two, led by its religious scholars, right? And so the religious scholars, like the Grand Mufti Ibn Baz, saw the kingdom as too westernized or becoming too influenced by the United States. And so basically they tried to run amok and overthrow the kingdom by doing this, but they were quickly deposed, and Juliman al-Khattabi was actually executed.
And that event prompted the royal family to deliberately start accommodating the Wahhabi mullahs.
Yes.
They did it in two ways. Sometime later, they created a new branch of the Saudi government called the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. The Ministry of Islamic Affairs is dedicated to the spread of Wahhabism internationally. And every embassy and consulate in the world has Ministry of Islamic Affairs officials embedded in it, as well as foreign ministry, intelligence, what have you. The second thing to keep in mind is the nature of the Saudi Arabian government. You all know that there are many members of the royal family. Well, how do you get ahead there? How do you become foreign minister, defense minister, deputy crown prince, or king? They don't have elections. The way in which you rise to prominence and power in Saudi Arabia is to seek and obtain the support of the Wahhabi mullahs. So every prominent person in Saudi Arabia, King Salman, his predecessor, all made their pilgrimages to kiss bin Laden's ring in Kandahar. Without doing that, they would not have the internal support they needed to rise into positions of power. In my mind, it's not so much affinity with Wahhabism that prompts the leaders of Saudi Arabia to support bin Laden, who is not a black sheep by any means. Just as an aside, one of his close relatives on 9/11 is working in the Washington, D.C. embassy as an embassy official and the head of one of the Saudi charities that are supporting al-Qaeda. What did these Saudi officials do? They had supported al-Qaeda not just with money, but with the logistical support al-Qaeda needed to mount the 9/11 attacks and the Cole bombing before it.
Okay, let me clear up some things here, right, from Mr. Kreindler, is that it wasn't as easy explained as he said it, so I'm going to fill in the gaps. So in 1990, the Iraqi Ba'athist Army invaded Kuwait, and there was rumors, which was perpetrated by the United States, that Saudi Arabia was next. And so Saudi Arabia, through King Khalid, went and tried to convey a meeting with other Gulf leaders about what to do, because they don't really have much of a standing army. So because the Soviets were repelled by the Mujahideen, and one of the warlords was Osama bin Laden, who went back to Saudi Arabia to live, he basically proposed a meeting, or tried to convey a meeting with the members of the Saudi government and King Khalid and Prince Faisal bin Al Saud, who's the head of the General Intelligence Directorate, the GID in short. And so he chaired this meeting and said that he would offer his assistance in using the ragtag mujahideen, the Arabs, to repel against the formidable Ba'athist army. And King Khalid was horrified at this and basically rejected the notion, but he did respect bin Laden enough and actually had him under house arrest because he feared that by doing this and rejecting his proposal and to invite a foreign army to defend the nation, that bin Laden would actually use the mujahideen to attack Saudi Arabia. And so what happened was they invited the United States to come and defend the country. And this enraged the religious community. In fact, Ibn Baz, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, put a fatwa on the declaration and basically failed. And he basically then supported the armies to the foreign invaders to come and defend the most holiest site in all of Islam. Bin Laden actually saw this as an affront to Islam, and a lot of the radical Wahhabis agreed with them. And so there was a backdoor deal made by Prince Turki bin Faisal and bin Laden, where Prince Faisal said, we'll unfreeze your assets and give you back the passport, but you got to leave the country. So when he did this, Saudi Arabia started giving blackmail money to bin Laden so that they wouldn't attack him. Now, at the same time, while he was doing that, there were sympathizers within the kingdom. Now, there's over 5,000 approximately members of the royal family. Now, you got to remember, there's the royal lineage family called the Sudari Seven, which are basically the 7 sons of the founder of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud. Okay, so Ibn Saud had 7 sons, and that's Khalid, Faisal, Fahd, all the Salman. And so all these sons had other sons, and they had sons. And so the family's huge. And these are the prominent members of the kingdom. It's approximately about 5,000. So you have a lot of sympathizers in that clan that sympathized with bin Laden. He started giving him money. So Al-Qaeda was getting funding from the kingdom so they wouldn't attack him, and also within sympathizers of the Saudi kingdom. Hopefully that cleared up some things.
All those of you who are our age remember the embassy bombings. Okay. Before we get to 9/11, you know, it's worth remembering something you and I talked about at lunch. Why did bin Laden turn from an ally of the United States fighting the Russians to the vitriolic hatred of the United States? In my mind, the #1 reason that caused him to despise us was the presence of U.S. military troops, particularly female troops, in Saudi Arabia after we were protecting Kuwait and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein. So for many years before 9/11, you had Saudi government officials working with Al-Qaeda and coordinating with Al-Qaeda. What happened on 9/11? The 2 lead hijackers, Hazmi and Midhar,
Khalid al-Minar and Nawaf al-Hazmi,
attended, toward the end of 1999, attended a convention, a conference in Malaysia of Al-Qaeda and other terrorists, at which the 9/11 attack was planned, as well as the Cole attack. These terror attacks all emanated from a tragic event in 1988. How many of you remember when the USS Vincennes shot down the Iranian Airbus mistakenly, killing 300 plus people? So Iran vowed revenge. The plot to destroy 10 US commercial air carriers was called the Bojinka plot.
Wait a minute. Wow. Okay. No. This is outright false. This is the only thing I disagreed with Kreindler. By the way, the Bajinka plot was hatched by um, a Baluchistan clan led by Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Now, Ramzi Youssef is the suspect in the bombing of the 1993 World Trade Center. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, his uncle, is the alleged mastermind of the planes operation of September 11, 2001. In 1995, when they were in Pakistan, they hatched a plot to use bombs to explode 12 airliners coming from the United States and leaving Southeast Asia, going to the United States, and have them all explode over the Pacific 1 minute from each other. There was another part of that plan in which, according to the interrogation of one of the Bajinka plotters, Abdul Hakim Murad, who was captured by the Philippines National Police while they were mixing chemicals in a hotel that him and Ramzi Youssef were staying in. And there was a mixture of chemicals and black smoke came out. And they left the laptop up there. And Ramzi Youssef told Hakim Murad to try and get the laptop because it had all the plans and names of people in the plans of the Bajinka plot. He went back and he got caught. So under interrogation, he told his lead investigator, Rodolfo Mendoza, and said to him that there was a second part of that plot. And the second part of that plot was that there were sleeper cells inside the United States waiting orders to hijack airliners. And that was 10 airliners that they were going to be hijacked and crash into the Sears Tower, the World Trade Center, Pentagon, the Empire State Building, Golden Gate Bridge. And there was other targets as well. And this interrogation report was sent to the FBI under Director Louis Freeh in 1996. And they caught Ramzi Youssef in 96 in Pakistan, and he was sentenced to 240 years, along with Abdul Hakim Murad, Wali Amin Khan Shah, and others. But the FBI, I guess, didn't act on it. But this was not an Iranian plot. This was a plot hatched by Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. In fact, this was the blueprint to the September 11th attacks because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed actually proposed the idea of 10 planes to Osama bin Laden. Now, take that with a grain of salt because that came under the interrogation of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and he was tortured. So we don't know if he was telling the truth or he was lying.
A plot that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed knew about and tried to implement. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ramzi Youssef, was the convicted bomber of the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. 9/11 was a combination of the Bojinka plot to destroy 10 U.S. aircraft with the attack on the World Trade Center in '93. The World Trade Center, of course, is seen as a symbol of American capitalism, particularly Jewish American capitalism. And that's why it was such a potent target for bin Laden. And our intelligence community knew all this. There's no secret about about the Bojinka plot and bin Laden's antipathy toward the United States and the support of Saudi government officials.
And what Kreindler doesn't bring up here, because I guess it's not relevant, but it's important enough that the NSA had a wiretap on bin Laden's satellite phone and also to a house in Sana'a, Yemen. The capital of Yemen is Sana'a, and it was an Al-Qaeda communications hub, and they were listening to the phone calls. And then they got in December of 1999, they overheard a phone call between a person by the name of Khalid, whose real name is Wali bin Attash. He's currently in Guantanamo Bay, who's being charged for being a participant in 9/11 attacks through logistics and coordination. And he was talking to a person named Khalid. Now, the person on the other end, Khalid, is Khalid al-Mihdhar. And there was another person named Nawaf, and that's Nawaf al-Hazmi. So Khalid told them about this meeting in Malaysia that they're to attend. And so they did. In January 5th of 2000, they go to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and it's commonly known as the Al-Qaeda Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia meeting. And the NSA told the CIA about this meeting and the FBI, and the CIA told Malaysian authorities to go and take photographs of people who are coming in and out of this condominium that was owned by Yazid Sufat, who's actually a Indonesian businessman with ties to the terrorist group Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia. And in this meeting were all like leaders of terrorist groups like Ridwan Samudin. He goes by Hambali, second in command of Jemaah Islamiyah, known bomb maker. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Walid bin Atash, Khalid al-Midar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Fahad al-Kuso, who was involved with the 1998 East Africa, I'm sorry, the bombing of the USS Cole. And so there was, like Kreindler said, operations were being talked about, like USS Cole bombing and 9/11 planes operation. That's what they were speculating that this happened. Now, the photographs that were taken were sent to the CIA's virtual station, which is called the Bin Laden Issue Station, codenamed Alex Station. And the CIA withheld the photographs from the NSA and the FBI and the State Department. And they found out that Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi had US visas and they were going to travel to the United States. And the CIA withheld that information from the FBI for 16 months. And they lived inside the United States for 16 months without anybody realizing it.
So where did this all begin? The fall of '99, Hazmi and Midhar are in Malaysia planning the 9/11 attack, along with other terrorists and the Cole attack. They were monitored by the CIA daily. From Malaysia, after their planning was complete, they went on a holiday that had particular appeal to two radical Wahhabist, soon-to-be suicide murderers who were on their way to heaven in a couple of years. So they went on a sex vacation to Bangkok. The CIA monitored them there. From Bangkok, they arrived in Los Angeles.
The CIA wasn't the only one. The NSA, because Nawaf al-Hazmi had a cell phone, also were monitoring his phone calls as well. So, and they were the one agency that didn't lose track of them. The CIA actually went under the Alex Station deputy, the chief of Alex Station was Richard Blee, and then held a national security brief meeting with the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Director of the FBI, Director of the DIA, and the Director of the FBI, and said that they lost them. When they left the Malaysia meeting, the CIA claims that they lost them. Now, what the CIA didn't tell them, Richard Blee didn't tell them at the same time, was that they were coming to the United States. They withheld that information intentionally. And later on in the 9/11 Commission, the Joint House Inquiry, which I covered extensively, Director of the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, the Director of Counterterrorism, Kofor Black, and the Deputy Chief, the number 2 at Alex Station, all testified that the FBI was told, and they were given conflicting answers, by the way, all 3, in which George Tenet said nobody read the cable that came in regarding their US visas, but over 50 agents read the cable from the CIA. Kofor Black said the FBI was given some information. Tom Wilshire basically said the FBI had enough information. And all 3 was untrue, by the way.
January 15th, 2000. CIA monitored their flight and their arrival. Before January 15th, 2000, a high-ranking official in the Saudi embassy, whose name I know, and because of the disgusting protective orders imposed upon us by the Justice Department with the blessing of the court, I can't tell my clients, one of whom is in this room. This official sent an instruction to a Saudi consular official in Los Angeles, Thumairi, ordering him to provide the help that Hazmi and Midhar needed. They didn't.
I'm going to try and guess that this Saudi official that he can't name no, that wouldn't be right. No, I'm wrong. No, I was going to say Muassed al-Jara. But no, he was already in the United States, so I'm wrong.
Speak a word of English. They wouldn't know the exit sign from the entrance sign. So Thumeri and his accomplice, who was a Saudi intelligence official, Bayoumi, arranged with people who were working with.
Okay, let me reverse a little bit because he's leaving out some details. So when Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi entered landed at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, they actually were met by a Tunisian cab driver by the name of Khalid Ben Amarine. The FBI actually interviewed him later on after the 9/11 attacks. And he said that he was sent by the imam of the King Fahd Mosque, in which James Kreindler mentioned, Fahad al-Thumeri. Fahad al-Thumeri told Khalid Ben Amarine that go to the airport, you're picking up 2 Saudis. And he didn't tell them their names. And when the FBI showed him photographs, there was like 30 photographs. He showed Khalid Ben Amarine. He picked out 2 of those photographs, 19 of them with the hijackers. And the 2 pictures he took out were Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. So he sent both of them to the king, to Fahad al-Thumeri. And according to the 9/11 Commission, they had no idea where Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi stood from January 15th to February 2nd of 2000. The 9/11 Commission was basically covering up the fact they knew exactly who they were staying with. They were staying in a room provided by Fahad al-Thumeri, but because he's a Saudi consular officer as well as Omar al-Bayoumi, who met Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi conveniently in some non-descriptive halal restaurant in Los Angeles, out of the hundreds of restaurants in that city. And according to the 9/11 Commission, Omar al-Bayoumi saw Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi come into the restaurant, but that's not what Qaysam bin Dyson, who was with Omar al-Bayoumi, stated in his interview with the FBI, stating that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were already in the restaurant, and Omar al-Bayoumi and Qaysam bin Dyson basically went there and met them. Omar al-Bayoumi told the 9/11 Commission he never met Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Fahad al-Thumeri, who was interviewed by the 9/11 Commission, 9/11 Commission said they found him to be deceptive because he claimed that he never met Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. But like I said, with the latest declassified files that I provided in my latest video, it's in the files that Omar al-Bayoumi provided funding to both Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. His name is unredacted. It's Omar al-Bayoumi, who worked for a Saudi government company who was paid for by a Saudi official, giving money to Omar al-Bayoumi, in which he gave to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi.
With them. And this is an interesting thing. Al-Qaeda has had and still has today operatives in the United States. In California, in LA, they needed blue-eyed, blonde-haired surfer dudes who could take Hazmi and Mihdhar around and teach them how to look and act like Americans. The terrorists were helped by dozens of...
Actually, also, they were selected to be pilots. In fact, according to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, they were originally selected to be the pilots for Flight 77. Not many people realize this, but because they spoke poor English and they didn't go to English classes, they did a little bit, but they didn't continue it. And they were supposed to go to flight schools. When they went to a flight school in Los Angeles, they couldn't enter the school because they didn't speak any English. Now, whoever thought of them to be pilots for this operation really didn't choose a really good idea, but because they were the only really experienced Al-Qaeda operatives out of the members of the 9/11 operation, they were selected for this operation, but they were poor choice.
These people.
So Hani Hanjour replaced them into last minute.
Under the control and direction of Saudi government officials. So they were picked up at the airport. They were provided housing near the King Fahd Mosque. That was a center point funded by the then King Fahad. His son came over with $10 million. That was the meeting place for Al-Qaeda. Hazmi and Midhar were given money. Prince Bandar Bush, best friend of George Bush, Saudi ambassador to the United States, his wife, through Bayoumi, gave Hazmi and Midhar $25,000.
Okay, let me clear something up here because I've covered this extensively. So there was payments made that were originating out of a Riggs bank account through Bandar bin Sultan, the former U.S. Saudi ambassador under Reagan, Bush Sr., and Bush Jr. And he was a good friend to the Bush family. They gave him a nickname, Bandar Bush, that Kreindler suggests. So the money went to Haifa bin Faisal. Haifa bin Faisal is the wife of Bandar bin Sultan. Haifa bin Faisal gave that money to a woman named Mawida Dawijak, who's the wife of a Saudi militant linked with Omar al-Bayoumi named Osama Basnan. Osama Basnan gave that money to Omar al-Bayoumi, and Omar al-Bayoumi gave the money to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And the payments were all at once. They came in through monthly increments of $3,000 to $4,000 every month. And this continued for about 14 months, even after the 9/11 operation was done. I think 2 months later, they were still getting payments. But yeah, it was directly from. So indirectly, I mean, it wasn't Prince Bandar who was giving money directly to the hijackers, but you know, that money went to the hijackers. Now, did Prince Bandar know about this? Maybe. But did he not know about it? That very well could be a possibility too.
We have traced the exact money trail from one of the dirty charities under scrutiny into the hands of a Saudi government agent in LA who ran a fake charity who sent the money to Karachi and then ultimately to Mohammed Atta in the Hamburg cell. So the money trail is known. The Saudi government officials, in addition to introducing the two terrorists to other people in the mosque, as I said, started English lessons, gave them money, housing, introduced them to Saudi military pilots who I believe were instrumental in training them to fly jets. They did a little trip to Las Vegas. I don't know, but I believe that they received training from Saudi military pilots in the deserts around Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's a speculation. We don't know what they did in Las Vegas. This is one of the mysteries, one of the many mysteries of 9/11 is that Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, Ziad Jarrah went to Las Vegas. I think somebody else too. I think Khalid al-Mihdhar. I want to say Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. No, I'm not too sure, but I know Atta, Jarrah, and al-Sheikh went to Las Vegas and stood at a hotel in the Economy Inn. And they stood there, I think, 2 or 3 days. And who they met is unknown. Now, the 9/11 Commission report states that they did go to Las Vegas, but they didn't know what they were going there for. So go figure. I don't know what they were doing there.
Yes. In a short period of time, the FBI was alerted to the presence of Hazmi and Midhar. Hazmi and Midhar, in fact, roomed with an FBI informant.
Right. Now, the FBI informant, which I covered in a video, his name is Abdussadah Sheikh. He actually was an informant for a long time, even well into the late 1980s. He was recruited by an agent, special agent named Stephen O'Brien, who basically, Stephen Butler. Stephen Butler was a special agent out of the San Diego field office because Abdussadah Sheikh was known at this mosque, and he had a lot of connections in the community. And there was a series of bombings, small bombings in the Orange County area of California, and they wanted to know more about it. And Abdussadah Sheikh was providing very menial details to the FBI, and they opened him up as a C1 confidential informant. And what happened was he put out in a bulletin at this mosque about renting rooms, and 2 men actually had met him about inquiring about renting a room, and it was Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And so he met them and he rented a room with them. And they told Abdussadah Sheikh that they didn't trust him because they told him about Omar al-Bayoumi and said they didn't trust him because they thought he was a Saudi agent because Omar al-Bayoumi would always walk around with a camera and filming people. And according to the FBI in the latest declassified reports, those videos basically show Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Hazmi at a party. And I wish we could see that video and stuff, you know, because it's rare video showing them. But yeah.
The FBI did not arrest them, did not question them.
Well, Abdus Sheikh reported to Stephen Butler's handler and said that there were two men from Saudi Arabia who, you know, that were interested in going to a flight school. And Stephen Butler told him, who are these guys? And he only told him their first names, Khalid and Nawaf. But Butler tried to press him numerous times throughout the months of 2000, in the summer of 2000, about who they were. And Abdus Sheikh never told him who they were. He says, no, they're good, quiet Muslims. They're religious. They pray. In the, you know, they do Salat and Fajr, the morning prayers and stuff. So
lost them. The CIA, of course, what they're doing is illegal, and was probably
at this point. By the way, at this point, the FBI didn't know that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Hazmi were inside the United States. Only the NSA and the CIA knew, because the NSA were listening to Nawaf Hazmi's cell phone, and they tracked them from Thailand to the United States. And the CIA, who were tracking Nawaf Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar back in Yemen to Malaysia to Thailand inside the United States. Now, the CIA can't conduct operations legally inside the United States. That's why the Saudis were monitoring Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Hazmi on the West Coast, as well as Hani Hanjour. And on the East Coast, it was the Israeli art student ring and the moving companies who were monitoring the Hamburg cell, Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah.
Under the mistaken approach that they could turn the two, and that the two terrorists would help root out Saudi dissidents who the royal family would have exterminated.
That was the CIA excuse that they gave, that the reason why they never told the FBI about these two guys was that they were trying to turn them as informants and to informants inside Al-Qaeda. Because in 1999, Cofer Black, the head of the counterterrorism unit, CIA, basically was horrified at the fact that the CIA never had an informant inside Al-Qaeda. In fact, the only informant of Al-Qaeda was Jamal al-Fadl, but he was the FBI's informant. In fact, in the early 90s, I think in 1992, he basically was a financier for Al-Qaeda, and he basically was a gambler. So bin Laden gave him like $100,000 to try and procure like chemical weapons, and he spent the money, and he thought he was going to get, you know, killed for this. So he walked into some embassy, and I think in some African country, and they handed him over to the FBI. And Jack Clunan from New York of the counterterrorism unit I-49 basically interviewed him and found it to be a goldmine of information about this group Al-Qaeda that was new.
Later, I'll talk about that. I'll tell you a little bit about Khashoggi and why he was killed. It's not because he was a dissident. It's because of his contact with us. If I don't get to it, remind me. The two terrorists are in the United States, monitored until they're lost by the FBI and the CIA. And of course, 9/11 happens. Bob Mueller became director just, I think, a week or two before 9/11. What happened on 9/11? It was the perfect storm to create the worst and most pervasive cover-up in our nation's history. When President Bush was told about the attack, he was in Sarasota, Florida, reading Horton Does the Who, written by...
Actually, wasn't it My Pet Goat? I always thought it was just that book, but if there were other books too, I think there were others. So I think there were other books he was reading too.
One of our famous alumni, to a kindergarten class when he was told about the attack. The first words out of his mouth was it Saddam? Remember how set he was upon killing Saddam Hussein, who had vowed to kill his father, the previous President Bush. Bandar was maybe his closest friend, been to the ranch in Crawford, Texas, more than anybody else. On 9/11, we were still...
Makes a little bit of sense why he responded that way, wasn't Saddam. Now, look, all throughout 2001, there was foreign intelligence and domestic intelligence hand over fist data about bin Laden wanting to attack inside the United States. Now, there was a presidential daily brief on August 6, 2001, that had the headliner, bin Laden determined to strike inside the United States. This was information that was gleaned over from the arrest of Ahmed Rassam, an Al-Qaeda operative in Canada who was trying to get inside the country using a car which had a number of explosives in it that was part of the Millennium Bomb Plot of 2000, which is a multi-phase international plot that involved the bombing of the USS Sullivans, which later became the USS Cole, the bombing of a hotel in Jordan, the bombing of Israeli landmarks in Israel on the border of Jordan, in which one of them involved was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And if you ever heard of that name, yes, he is the co-founder, he is the founder, the initial founder of the Islamic State and Iraq, which later became the Islamic State and the Levant. Also, but by the way, the initial name was Tawhid al-Jihad wal Jamad wal Jihad al-Tawhid or something like that. And as well as the bombing of Los Angeles International Airport, and that was tagged to Ahmed Rassam. But he was arrested and detained by the FBI, and they basically interrogated him, and he told them about going to training camp Al-Farouk in Afghanistan, where he was learning about how to build bombs and do guerrilla training and whatnot. And part of that interrogation made it to the CIA briefing, which was later a presidential daily brief, Osama bin Laden determined to strike inside the United States. So
dependent upon Saudi.
There was, in other words, there was a ton of information that bin Laden was going to conduct a big terrorist attack. So you would think that there would be stricter security measures at, like, say, Immigration of Naturalizations and Services, or the FAA, airline security, or maybe overseas at the US consular offices in Saudi Arabia. I just did a video about that today, earlier. And none of these stricter security measures happened. It was almost like, hey, the system is blinking red, as George Tenet once said, but yet nobody heeded the warnings. Whether that was on purpose or not, I leave it up to you.
Oil, it's long before fracking. President Bush was set upon using the 9/11 attack as an excuse to go to war with Iraq and kill Saddam Hussein. And who was our most important ally in that war?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
And
so immediately,
in fact, it was the neocons who pushed that, the dual U.S. citizen, you know, the dual Israeli citizens, United States, Israel. They're the ones that pushed the Iraq war, right? The ones who pushed for Afghanistan was Powell and Rice, but the ones who pushed for Iraq was Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Dov Zakheim, you know, the real ghouls, you know, these guys, the brutal murderers. And they had the ear of who? Dick Cheney and George Bush. And anybody who had the ear of Bush and Cheney basically was given power. And the people who really pushed that were the White House lawyers later on, like David Addington and John Yoo, who circumvented what? The Department of Justice and the Geneva Conventions and the Constitution by allowing people to be labeled enemy combatants, which is a vague term. And that label was supposed to be for the Department of Justice. But no, they allowed for the president to name anybody an enemy combatant to the United States and left it vague like that. And then they taxed the CIA to do rendition plots in Afghanistan, Iraq, and they were grabbing these Pashtun farmers who had no connection to terrorism and tortured the living crap out of them. In fact, I think in Guantanamo Bay, they held up to 800 something prisoners at one point. I would suggest reading the book, The Guantanamo Files, for more information about that. But there was over, I think 1,000 renditions by the CIA in these private planes between 2002 to 2004. The rendition program was created under the Clinton administration. Not many people know that too.
He and those close to him in the White House did not want to hear anything about the Saudi government role in 9/11. On the FBI front, Bob Mueller said, "Oh my God, look at the mess I've inherited and this colossal failure."
Not to mention the cover-ups as well, which Kreindler is not going to mention because I saw this video already. There was a cover-up of additional hijacking teams that may not even be Al-Qaeda. They could be Saudi militants. Remember what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said, and this is before he got tortured. He did an interview with Yoshi Fuda of Al Jazeera. Now I'm going to be interviewing the co-author with Yoshi Fuda of the book Masterminds of Terror, Nick Fielding, Sunday, in which I'm going to ask him about the extra, the 10 planes idea by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which was shot down by bin Laden. But we know that there was going to be additional hijackings, and I covered this, and so does my co-researcher, DJ Thermal Detonator, about United Airlines Flight 23, and DJ Thermal Detonator is the only person I know in the world that covered the additional attempted hijackings on September 13th when they lifted the airline suspensions ban, in which over 50 people were arrested at JFK and LaGuardia about boarding on planes with weapons. One had a bomb underneath the chair. One was dressed as a pilot. He was a relative of the bin Laden family. The FBI basically detained these people on immigration violations and deported all of them. Sounds familiar? That's exactly what they did with the Israelis. They overstood their visas. They were handed over to INS and they were deported. And they were not even fully investigated by the 9/11 Commission or the FBI for fuller scrutiny. And that includes the urban moving systems, the high fivers or the dancing Israelis. And there was more of them too. And so the FBI covered that up as well.
This cannot see the light of day. You would expect that the top counterterrorism agents in the FBI would be put in charge of the investigation.
Right.
One of them is now working with us, and he and I are talking together every day.
And that person is Ken Williams, who wrote the Phoenix Memo. I've interviewed Ken Williams, and one of the few people that ever has. And he wrote what was commonly known as the Phoenix Memo in 2001, where he tried to warn the FBI and the State Department that there was an informant that he was handling by the name of Henry Ellen, who was a Muslim convert, and basically found out that there was a number of terrorist groups, not Al-Qaeda related, that were training in Scottsdale, which is Arizona's home to more flight schools than any state in the country, that there was an unusually high number of radical militants linked to terrorist groups and cells that were training for flight schools and wanted to attack the United States. This memo was not read by Bush until the following year. And it wasn't read by a number of different people that were attached to the memo, like John O'Neill in New York and Minneapolis and Oklahoma, and it wasn't acted upon.
Yusuf was the first Arabic-speaking FBI agent, the first agent to infiltrate Al-Qaeda and turn a high-level Al-Qaeda operative. He was the FBI legate in Saudi Arabia and had been with the king and knows the Saudis intimately. Was he put in charge of any of the 9/11 flights in their investigations? He was kept away from 9/11. Flight 77, the flight that crashed into the Pentagon, Hazmi and Midhar were two of the terrorists on that flight. Who was put in charge of investigating Flight 77, where Hazmi and Midhar played the most important role in planning the attack with the assistance of Saudi government officials?
Yeah, this is huge. Now, this is the dividing line, the truth movement. Yet this is one of the most important incidents in all of 9/11, because when we crashed into the Pentagon, it was an act of war. It wasn't an act of war at the World Trade Center. It wasn't an act of war when the towers came down. It wasn't an act of war when the plane crashed in Shanksville. It was an act of war when Flight 77 crashed in the Pentagon. So when I hear these people promote that no plane crashed in the Pentagon, they don't realize what they're throwing away is Saudi government complicity in financing Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, because if there's no hijackers, that means there's no Saudi complicity in financing the hijackers, which can be linked to Bandar bin Sultan and Saudi government officials like Fahad al-Tamari, Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan, Muwasset al-Jarrah, and probably others. Because if there's no hijackers, there's no money trail for these people, and they're not involved. Same thing for the Israelis, who are monitoring the Hamburg cell in Florida, in New York, and New Jersey, using an art student ring and a moving front company. There were more than just one moving company. There was Urban Moving Systems in New Jersey. You had Classical International Movers. You had White Glove Movers. You had Max Movers, Moishi Movers. And this was all found out when they pulled over the dancing Israelis, or the high fivers, at the New Jersey Eastern Turnpike, and they found a notebook with all these numbers of all these moving companies. And there was an investigation into Classic International Movers, who also were hiring Israeli nationals to work as movers in these companies. Now, whether they had connections to the Israeli military or the Mossad is yet to be seen, but they did an investigation and they deported those people too.
Bob Mueller pick to run probably the most important of
But like I said, with the Saudis, if there's no hijackers, these Israeli rings, like the art student ring and the moving front companies, they don't exist, because if there's no hijackers, none of these rings are monitoring the hijackers. That means these operations don't exist. So that's why I think it's a big deal to get through to these people and say, hey, look what you're doing by purporting these fringe conspiracies, because it doesn't make sense. If there's no hijackers, none of these agencies have these operations which were monitoring and assisting the hijackers.
4 flights investigation. Jackie McGuire was a probationary officer 6 months out of Quantico. If you want to institute a cover-up, you need a young, dumb kid who is going to follow orders. Who was his new head of counterterrorism? Michael McGarity, who came from organized crime, and organized crime is a completely different model than terrorism. Michael McGarity is the principal architect today of lying to the families and keeping the documents that we know exist away from us. In LA, Steve Moore was put in charge of a 400-person FBI team looking at the activities of Hazmi and Mihdhar, and looking at Thumairy, Bayoumi, and the other 9 identified Saudi government officials.
Right. Now, some of those are Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan, Muwasset al-Jarrah, okay, as well as Fahad al-Tamari, which I mentioned. Now, I got to add a little bit to this. Remember Khalid Ben-Amarine, the taxi driver, the Tunisian cab driver that picked up Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi from the airport on January 15th? Well, the FBI were investigating Khalid Ben-Amarine, and I had the memorandums for the records uploaded on my WordPress for you to read for free. Robert Mueller, the director of the FBI, killed that investigation abruptly. Nobody knows why. And then when he killed the operation, the FBI handed him over to INS because he had an expired US visa, and he was deported to Tunisia, and nobody's heard from him since. He's a key eyewitness for the connection between a Saudi government official, Fahad al-Tameri, and to two hijackers that were involved with the 9/11 attacks in Khalid al-Bin Nawaf al-Hazmi. So that would be part of the cover-up as well. I don't know if Kreindler's aware of that or not, but he doesn't mention it here.
Being in LA at 3 a.m. every morning, he would personally call Director Mueller. He did it every 48 hours to update him on the investigation. Mueller
sure
is
Mueller told
reporting
probably Mueller
to the president for his daily, President Bush, for his daily intelligence briefing. Steve Moore is reporting to Director Mueller on the progress they're making in investigating Saudi government officials. Enormous progress was made by the agents in the field in the first 2 or 3 months, until Bob Mueller deputized Michael McGarity and Jackie McGuire to shut them down. Subpoenas that have served would not be followed up. Interviews were canceled. It's over. So when Dan said, why did the 9/11 Commission exonerate Saudi Arabia? Because they were lied to by Robert Mueller under oath in Congress and others who did not want the commission to know what role the Saudi government played, because then Saudi Arabia is our ally in the war against Iraq. And he did not want the world to know about this colossal intelligence and law enforcement failure. The investigation was dead. The agents who are working the case are disgusted, horrified, and after a couple years, when the 9/11 Commission came out, and they know what a lie it is, on their own, they resurrect the investigation. In 2007, they go back to the witnesses and start building the criminal case that every one of them joined the FBI to do, to investigate and prosecute crime, not to be part of lying to America and lying to the families of 3,000 murdered Americans.
Right.
Their investigation proceeded from 2007 until it was shut down in February, March, and April of 2016. At that point, we had President
And the name of that operation is Operation Encore.
Obama in the White House, and James Comey as director of the FBI. Now, you know, I was a fan until I learned this of President Obama. Joe Biden's a friend. I was his New York chair when he ran for president. My dad and I helped him in 1988 on his campaign. What President Obama did is the most treacherous and outrageous act I know of in our nation's history.
So much for being a progressive, right? You would think hope and change. Well, Obama just continued the Bush policies. In fact, he accelerated the drone strike program, which basically was where he bombed 7 Arab countries and killed tens of thousands of people. There was an operation that was led by the CIA under General David Petraeus, and which was authorized by the United States, Jordan, and Israel, which was Timber Sycamore, which allowed the Saudis to be involved as well in the funding and arming and training of Syrian jihadists to help overthrow the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, because he's an Alawite. The Saudis see this as a religious war. The Israelis see this as a geopolitical war. So there's two fronts and two wars from two different countries.
President Obama and John Kerry wanted the Iran nuclear deal and the eventual
which was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA.
Normalization of relations with Iran as their signature foreign policy achievement. And
Right.
it's a goal we all share. It'd be great if you could get Iran to abandon nuclear
The
weapons
Saudis were big
and
behind
change.
that. Which
What
he's
was
gonna mention.
treasonous is the quid pro quo he entered into with King Salman. The Saudis and the Israelis, Netanyahu, were the strongest opponents to the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
Everyone in the room knows there is no shaking Netanyahu in opposing the Iran nuclear deal. But Obama thought he could shake the Saudis and get them to drop their opposition. With their opposition and the Israelis, there was no chance of it passing the Senate. So he cut a deal with King Salman, and his deal was, I will kill the 9/11 litigation if you stand down in opposing the Iran nuclear deal. That deal was struck. As we were mentioning before, when Congress passed JASTA overwhelmingly, Obama vetoed it, the only veto of his presidency that was overridden, and as I said, overridden 98-1, just Harry Reid dissented, and 346 to 77 in the House.
No surprise,
What
Reid is a
I thought
Israeli
at the
first.
time was that's what Obama did to kill the Iran, to kill the agent's investigation into 9/11. What I didn't know when JASTA was passed then was what happened in the Bureau. That's when James Comey had Michael McGarity and Jackie McGuire shut down the resurrected FBI investigation.
Operation Encore.
So, you know, being at Dartmouth, the room is filled with smart people, and you're thinking like, how does this guy know any of that? The answer is, after all these years, the agents who have worked the case, many of them have retired, and they've come to us and said, here's what we know. We want to finish what we started when we joined the Bureau. The only way for the truth to come out is for us to join with you. So,
Right, and by the way, when I interviewed Ken Williams told me that the FBI told him, now Ken Williams was retired, mind you, that the FBI told him not to assist in the victims' families with Kreindler and Kreindler. And I was horrified. I said, wow, they really told you that? And he said, yeah. He goes, they didn't want me to work with them at all. And he went and worked with them anyway. And that's the FBI agent that he's talking about, which he can't say.
When we demand documents from the FBI and the Department of Justice, we know exactly what we're looking for. So we have been in a fight, not just with Saudi Arabia, JASTA. Saudi Arabia hired 19 lobby firms, and
Huge firms,
my
too.
estimate is they were paid something between $50 and $100 million a year to lobby against us and kill JASTA. They enlisted veterans and put them up at the Trump Hotel and steak dinners and said, help us get rid of this stupid law, without telling the veterans that they were going to be screwing the 9/11 families, that JASTA was the law the families needed to lift the legal immunity that Saudi Arabia claimed. So we overrode the veto, we beat the Saudi lobbyists, JASTA became law, and we started our lawsuit against Saudi Arabia in 2016, 15 years after we've been engaged in this war. The Saudis were shocked. You know, they've got the king on their side, King Obama. They're spending $50 million. How can a bunch of cripples and widows and orphans hobbling around Congress beat them? So when I said at the beginning, you will be revolted by what our government did, but thrilled with what Americans can accomplish, that is what I'm talking about. Few dozen families saying, we're going to knock on every door and buttonhole senators and congressmen, beat Obama and beat the Saudi lobby. And you know, now I'm waxing patriotic. There's no other country in the world where that could happen. In our battle with Saudi Arabia, not surprisingly, they're lying about the documents and keeping it from us, and they've got a lot of high-priced lawyers, and that's a tough fight. The fight we should not be having is the fight we have on a second front against the FBI and the Department of Justice. Now, we had served FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests, to get documents we know are in the FBI files on the investigation into Saudi government officials. Here's some of the answers we got to our FOIA requests early on. The documents you seek contain information about Osama bin Laden. We will not give them to you because of his privacy interest in that information. Another one was, we're not giving you any documents unless you produce death certificates for the 19 terrorists. This is our government.
Now, as for the death certificates of the 19 terrorists, they can't give death certificates because none of the terrorist families have given DNA samples to prove that they were definitely those people on the plane. So even if they were on the plane, it hasn't been technically proven because none of the terrorist families have given DNA samples to the FBI. And so those DNA profiles are listed as unknown.
Government. This is coming from the Department of Justice. So we have asked for these files. We've been fighting this fight in court for a year and a half. The FBI has given us some documents, 5 tranches or batches. What they give us has redacted information.
Yep.
So I told you the name of the high Saudi official in Washington,
Well, that's
D.C.
known
who
now.
tasked Thumari. That was redacted. And what we have, we're given under a protective order that precludes us from telling the families and speaking about it publicly. Yep. And I'm disgusted with these protective orders.
Now just imagine, this is a domestic agency that is supposed to be in the best interest of the American people in which it serves. And here they are conducting a cover-up of magnificent proportions regarding the additional hijackings, regarding the Israelis that were monitoring the hijackers, regarding the Saudis that were monitoring and financially assisting the hijackers, which money can be traced back to the Saudi government. All this is being covered up by the Department of Justice, the FBI. And as for pre-intelligence, that's the NSA and the Saudis as well, the NSA and the CIA. And nobody held them accountable. But just remember, if you don't believe in hijackers, the FBI cover-up regarding Saudi financing, that doesn't exist. Operation Encore, Pent Bomb, well, what investigation? There are no hijackers. There's no assisting of hijackers from Saudi officials or from the Israelis who are monitoring them. And even assisting them, maybe. That's why I have such a disparaging view and critical view about people who purport no hijackers on planes, because this is what you're eliminating.
We're doing whatever we can to overturn them, but the judge is not terribly sympathetic. So we know, for example, that in early 2016, when the investigation was shut down, remember March, April, the agents wrote a big summary on their findings. It's there. It has this vast body of information about who, what, where, and how the Saudi government officials acted as the essential accomplices to Al-Qaeda. We've asked for it. We haven't gotten it. The Senate unanimously passed a resolution, Resolution 610, calling upon the declassification and the release of this information. The FBI has ignored what, how many times do you get the Senate to do anything unanimously now?
Really, except
the FBI.
Except for whether it's legislation for Israel or legislation to decrease tax reductions for big companies like Walmart and Target, or to expand on the budget of the Pentagon or the National Defense Authorization Act. That's when they vote unanimously.
Has ignored it. The Justice Department has ignored it. I and some of the families were with President Trump on 9/11. The next day, Attorney General Barr invoked state secrets
Yes.
and national
Yep.
security as an excuse to keep the FBI documents hidden.
Yeah,
We're fighting that. We have some champions tomorrow.
A U.S. Attorney General doing this to the 9/11 victims' families. Imagine. I mean, this is unconscionable. These are the servants of government that work for us, the people. Well, here it is. They don't serve in the best interest of the people. And this is exactly what the 9/11 Truth Movement needs to do. They need to pressure the Department of Justice. They need to pressure the Central Intelligence Agency. They need to pressure the National Security Agency. They need to pressure the Israeli consulate about those investigations of pre-intelligence that could have prevented 9/11. I mean, former senior executive Thomas Drake, one of the biggest whistleblowers of all time, basically said that the National Security Agency, the NSA, had collected so much metadata from those 2 wiretap phones, a bin Laden satellite phone in the house in Yemen, which was the Al-Qaeda communications hub, that he said that alone could have prevented 9/11 from even happening if that information was shared. Just them alone, not mentioning the CIA or the DI's Operation Able Danger or the CIA's Alex Station and what they collected. Oh my God, so much data, and it's all ignored. This is where we need to pay attention to. You understand, Gene? Right? It's not, I'm not directing this to you, but because I'm uploading this to YouTube. But you see why I'm a little bit like critical, Gene? Like, wow, and we got names here that we could hold accountable to. Kreindler just named some of them. I named some of them that he didn't name. So I would love to talk to Mick Harrison. I'd love to talk to that guy. Not the others, though, like, you know who.
Tulsi Gabbard at 1 o'clock will hold a press conference saying release, the information to the families. So luckily, we've got a lot of people, fighting this fight, but we should not have to be fighting our own government.
No, we shouldn't be.
We're making progress in court, but for us to win in court could take another 5 or 10 years. So we're trying to enlist support in Washington for us to get the documents, because if we get the FBI files, the Saudis know the game is up. And
hey, Truth Movement, there you go. They need help, right? Now, I'm going to reach out to James Kreindler, and there's another law firm too, Motley Rice, that's involved as well. Those are the 2 biggest. His law firm, Kreindler, and Motley Rice are the 2 biggest law firms. Right? There's other law firms I'm not aware of. I don't know their names, but there's others. But these are the 2 major players, right? This is where we can name names right here. All right, we can get our foot in the door. And I'm not telling you to dissuade from ground zero. And if we can get subpoenas and get some people to talk, whether they talk about who was working towers or whatnot. I mean, Nelson, DJ Thermal Detonator, gave you a great option, Denko Mechanical, who was not even supposed to be authorized to work in the World Trade Center. And meanwhile, they had World Trade Center passes while they were being investigated by the FBI about a fraudulent ID ring in Tennessee. Who the hell is Denko Mechanical? was owned by Sergei Denko. Who's that? Well, is that even a legitimate company? Well, when they called the number, it was basically to a house, Sergei's house. That's just one area. I mean, look, we got a lot to talk about, and we're not the enemy here. People like me and DJ Thermal Detonator, yeah, we're passionate, just like you, Gene. We're passionate about what we believe in. And, when these fringe conspiracy theories like no planes and CGI, planes and holograms and pods in these planes and no hijackers, right? It drives us nuts because, man, look at all the people that were involved in funding and assisting the hijackers and the intelligence that was collected by the domestic agencies with specific operations pertaining to those hijackers even before they got to the United States. And I did a video earlier today about the Visa Express program, the Saudi Visa Express program, and who is letting them in the country and why they were doing it. And I even showed documentation about one such person, Shania Steiger, who complained that she was alone working 400 cases a month and that she approved of the applications of 11 of those who turned out to be hijackers for Flight 9/11, even though those applications should have never been approved. Go to that video and I explain more.
Probably all of you have been reading about Saudi Arabia's desire to take Aramco public, do the IPO for 5% of the company, a company that will be worth between, depending upon the estimates, 1.3 to $2 trillion, and New York is the preferred venue over Hong Kong or London. So we're operating in Washington to try and get support there, because there's no way that us and the families are going to stand for taking Aramco public 100 yards away from ground zero. So Saudi Arabia has to resolve the 9/11 case for the Aramco IPO in New York to happen, in my opinion. So
if we could break Saudi Arabia, you know who they're going to basically share information regarding 9/11? Israel. If we can get to Saudi Arabia, we can get to Israel. Because I believe, now take this with a grain of salt, I believe they had a bigger part in the operation. Now, there's no direct evidence for this, but there is reasonable speculation. And one theory involves Ziad Jarrah, whose family was involved with Israeli intelligence. And myself and DJ Thermal Detonator and Ryan Dawson have done extensive work on this. But I want to be careful and say that Israel had a minor role that we have now regarding any complicity in the attacks. When it comes to foreknowledge, man, even the FBI knows it. That's why they redacted the FBI files regarding the dancing Israelis, the high flyers. Okay. And the art student ring, not the art students in the World Trade Center, Gillette and Bead, they're not Israeli. And there's only like 6 of them. The real big art student rings, like 250 of these people, not the ones that Rebecca Roth says. Don't listen to her. If we can get to the Saudis, we can get to the Israelis.
The fight is on 2 fronts in court, with Saudi Arabia and with the FBI.
Unfortunately.
And daily interaction with people in Washington who can help us and persuade, MBS, who was 15 when 9/11 occurred, to engage and resolve 9/11. Khashoggi. You want to hear about Khashoggi? Okay. So MBS's younger brother, KBS, was ambassador at age 28, Saudi ambassador to the United States. You may remember after Khashoggi was murdered, the NSA released some intercepts with communications from Khashoggi's phone to others. And that contained an intercept of communication between Khashoggi's phone and KBS's phone. Within 24 hours of that information being released by the NSA, KBS, what's the proper verb, did a tweeted the following message: "I've not spoken to Khashoggi. I only texted him, and my last text was October 26, 2017. So I'm thinking, why put the date in? That's weird. So the best investigator in the world, who knows more about Al-Qaeda terror financing than 100 people combined. I said, John, what happened that day? He said, oh, that's the day that one of our investigators met with Khashoggi in DC. Because Khashoggi was part of the intelligence community. We knew he knew a lot about Saudi government involvement in 9/11. And he said, would you come to New York and talk to my boss? He said, yeah, I would do that. So I'm sure that as soon as she left, he called KBS and said, look, the 9/11 lawyers are on to me. They know that I know what you guys did. Now, I didn't give him anything, but you're holding my kid in Saudi Arabia. You harm one hair on his head, and I will. So my belief is Khashoggi was killed not because he was a dissident. It's a lot of dissidents, but because he was holding this axe over the Saudis' head.
But now, just to add a little bit too, Jamal Khashoggi in 2003, I want to say the video was from Memory TV, MEMRI. I think it's 2003, where there was like the Saudi panel and they were talking about something, and then 9/11 conspiracies came up, and he dispelled some of them, such as, why wasn't there no Jews in the World Trade Center? And he said that rumor started with a Arabic newspaper. I think it was in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Qatar. It was actually Qatar that spread that rumor. And he's dispelled like 2 or 3 rumors about 9/11 and whatnot. He has a brother named Adnan Khashoggi, who was actually a gun runner during the Mujahideen Soviet invasion, and had some nefarious connections with the Mujahideen and Arab criminals. And he wasn't alone. There was other, Arab criminals that were connected with with Al-Qaeda, such as Mohammed Haydar Zamar and Mahmoud Darghazali. And if you never heard of them, they're basically the groomers of the Hamburg cell in Germany, who the CIA basically desperately tried to recruit as informants. Now, Zamar basically was captured by the Islamic State, and they negotiated with somebody with their release, and Zamar was released and whatnot in Syria. And he has a long history. Mahmoud Darghazali actually took over a bank account of one of the 9/11 hijackers and basically denied any, meeting any of them and whatnot. So, there's a lot to go in this history that shows, you have a CIA and these informants and gun runners and criminals connected with Al-Qaeda and to 9/11.
So our fight continues. I could be doing this, for another 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, really.
But I am hopeful that, with the enthusiasm and aid and support by people in Washington, we can kind of break through and bring Saudi Arabia to the table, because I know eventually they're going to lose, and engaging sooner would be better than all these details eventually coming out. So should I stop now and do some questions?
Okay, so I'm going to end it there, right? Because the video was long enough. So Gene, okay, that's the end of the breakdown video that you wanted me to do. I hope there was some information that was useful for you. And not just to Gene Laratonda, but to anyone watching this video. I hope the additional information was of use to you as well. And I'm going to reach out to James Kreindler and try to get him to come onto the show, the Darkened Hour, and so I can interview him about the progress made over the last couple of months and what they are hoping to get in the next couple of years regarding the JASTA Act, as well as the civil lawsuits against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so have a good night, guys. Take care and see you in the next video.